This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 9, Episode 22. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network, brought to you by HK. Today is Friday, February 2nd, 2024, as of the recording of this episode. In case you're not catching this live, we, of course, go out live on YouTube and Facebook, but many of you are probably listening to the podcast as published on our podcast feed, available on all the popular podcasting apps, Spotify, Audible, TuneIn Radio. I think we're even on iHeartRadio and their little podcast feature now as well. So check it out. If you try to catch these live, that's always cool, but you can always just make sure you download, listen to the latest episode on your favorite podcast player. I am, of course, your host, Riley Bowman, and today joined by our producer, Brian Doc McLaughlin.
That's it.
Hey, dude.
What's up?
It's been a long couple of weeks here.
Just got done with SHOT Show.
SHOT Show last week. This week's been a lot of playing catch-up.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm still not caught up.
I'm impressed we're getting this podcast done, to be honest. It's been a kind of a crazy week.
Yes. I mean, we were going to do it Wednesday, and something got in the way of that, and then we couldn't do it yesterday because something got in the way of that. And here we are, Friday.
Here we are. We're doing it.
We're doing it. That's right. So had a great SHOT Show. Met a lot of cool people. Did a lot of fun things. Hopefully some business deals happening. I think we got some things done and have some more in the works. So, and those of you that we happened to see while we were there, thank you for stopping by and seeing us. It was a good time. So today's episode, we're actually doing something a little bit different. I think it started kind of with an idea of yours and grew into something else. And I said, I think this could be almost like a series of episodes. I don't know if we're going to do these back to back to back. Probably not, because we have, like, next week will be our justified. Actually, it would have been, had we done this one on Wednesday, this episode, it would be the last day of the month. Technically, we're into February now.
Yep.
But usually the first episode of each month is our Justified Saves episode, which is continues to be one of the more popular episodes. People love to hear and listen to defensive gun use stories and of course our analysis of those stories. But that'll be next week's episode.
Yeah.
But this series, we are talking about this is what we're calling the Uncensored Beginner's Guide to Training.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of all the things that we wish we would have known when we were just kind of getting into this, when we were little babies, little training, gun fighting babies.
Gunfighting babies. I love that image.
So that's kind of the idea here, is what are all the things that we wish we could share with you, our listeners and viewers, that things we've learned over the years. And if you're starting from the get-go, you've never even taken a formal training class before, here's what we'd like you to know.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have been training for a fair number of years.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone to get instruction from a lot of different high quality instructors throughout the industry. And I think that's one of the things I notice pretty often with new shooters is they don't really understand how to train in the best possible way for you to get the most benefit for your money. I mean, a lot of this training and the time and the gear that goes into it is expensive. You want to return on that investment. What are the best practices for making the most of all of your training?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so today's episode in this Uncensored Beginner's Guide to Training, we're calling this the class. So the idea of, locating an instructor, choosing a good class or a course that you're going to take. What are the things that you want to have in mind with respect to that? What's the right mindset and frame of mind to go into training and taking training courses? And so that's the focus of today's episode. And in fact, today's episode is sponsored by, on our website, you could actually sign up for training classes all over the country. We have instructors in 27 states or something like that. And we're always trying to add more. And a lot of those are concealed carry type classes, but there's some good defensive pistol courses, and there's actually being added now some other really great courses by a few instructors. Like I know I saw like a less lethal class or an OC spray type class. I teach classes like we call them performance pistol classes, which are really about the efficiency of shooting and how to get better just at shooting, not necessarily getting into the tactics side of things. You can find all my classes listed on class.concealedcarry.com. And anything I think, Brian, you do, I think we try to make sure we get, like you did a class at C2 Tactical in Arizona last month or so ago, maybe 2 months ago now. And might have some more coming up this year as well. So anyway, please check our calendar, class.concealedcarry.com, to consider finding your next training course, hopefully a location near you. And also today's episode brought to you by the 2024 Guardian Conference. Because again, talking about training, well, guess what? One great place of getting the training would be the Guardian Conference. GuardianConference.com is a place to go for that. Maybe more on that later on in the episode. There is something that's kind of exciting. We're going to have a new class at this year's Guardian Conference, something new and different that hasn't happened there before. You want to mention that real quick?
Shotguns.
Yeah. So defensive shotgun course is going to be available at the 2024 Guardian Conference, taught by one of my favorite instructors, Eric Gelhaus. He taught for us the conference this last year. All pistol stuff is what he taught, and also some low light stuff. But Eric is well known and well regarded for his experience and knowledge in teaching shotguns. And so we're going to have a shotgun course available at the 2024 Guardian Conference for the first time ever.
That's going to be cool. I know pistols are cool, but I've done a lot of pistol training. I need to do more shotgun, more rifle, and that kind of stuff. I mean, that pistols seem to be like the thing that you're going to use the most often, usually in defensive situations. But I love the idea of being able to run a shotgun and a rifle really well. And at the Active Self-Protection Conference that we did last year, maybe it was the year before that, John Correa, he was putting on a tactical shotgun class, and he calls shotguns handheld claymores.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's kind of funny.
Oh yeah, it absolutely is. It's a great way of thinking of it. I think the shotgun absolutely is still today a viable defensive tool, especially in home defense. So it's good to learn how to use that better and more effectively. And Eric will teach you how to do that. I'll also let you know that this year's Guardian Conference, we will also have another first, which will be a carbine course, like an AR-15 carbine course, taught by Tyler Tharp, who was an assistant instructor at the conference last year. Tyler is really passionate about teaching shooting with a carbine, and Tyler will get you dialed in really quickly on running a carbine well. Again, more geared towards AR-15. We know a lot of our folks have interest in that. I imagine you could probably show up with other carbines as well, but probably most of you show up with an AR. So check that out, guys. The 2024 Guardian Conference at guardianconference.com. You want to get signed up, get your tickets now. Okay, don't wait too long. And if any of these courses excite you, then yeah, you should get after it. The thing is, I think our conference will always be more geared towards the pistol side, more geared towards concealed carry type related issues. After all, we are concealedcarry.com. However, it's not just about the pistol. And this is not called the Concealed Carry Conference. It's called the Guardian Conference. So we want to make all of you better, more prepared guardians, and that involves all kinds of tools of defense. That's why there's also OC spray classes, legal classes, hand-to-hand combatives courses, force on force, et cetera, et cetera. There's actually more than that. So check it out, guys. Hope to see you there. Let's get into our topic. So, Brian, the Uncensored Beginner's Guide to Training, the class. Meaning in the future, you'll probably hear us talk about things like, what do we do now at the range? What do we do in dry fire? What do we do? I don't know. What's the other thing we were talking about? Anyway, today, though, we're focusing more on mindset, how to approach training, especially when attending training courses. What's the best way to prepare yourself for training courses? Also, a little bit on maybe some ways that you can evaluate prospective instructors you might want to work with or courses you might want to take. So there's important considerations there, and we want to help you learn from, in some cases, mistakes made, and so what's the best way to approach this? Where do you want to start?
I think mindset, like how to show up for class is like one of the best parts.
Yeah.
We can get into the weed about weeds about gear and all that kind of stuff, but I think having a good mindset when you're approaching how to learn, especially in an environment like the gun world, where it can be kind of dangerous, and their tempers can be kind of short, and people can be very nervous, going into a lot of these situations. And so I think
Absolutely.
if you approach it with the proper mindset and how you're going to listen to your instructor, and also try to keep as much of that information as possible, I think that's where we're going to be at.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do you think would be some of the important mindset type pieces of this?
First thing that pops off at my head is being okay with failure.
Mm,
Pretty often I see people, they beat themselves up so much because they didn't do something right. And a lot of going through life is giving yourself the grace to know that, I haven't done this that much,
right.
and I made a mistake, and that's okay. And a lot of times you'll be performing, say you're on the range and you'll be performing a shooting drill in front of all of your friends, and all your peers and all the people you respect sit there and they get to watch you fail, you
Right.
know, and that can
Right.
be very difficult for a lot of people who aren't used to failure. One of the things that I really enjoy about training, and training very hard, is reaching those failure points, seeing where my limitations are and recognizing that. So I've become very comfortable with that in my own personal philosophy, and that's helped me kind of conquer a lot of that initial issues with learning a new skill. So I would say, failure is the top thing that kind of pops off at me.
Yeah.
Practice being okay with it.
Right.
Fail, look stupid, but try to get better,
Being okay with failure. It's part of learning. In fact, I think that in large part, our experience as humans in this thing we call life is about failure because I mean, failure is, I think it's the principal way we learn. I don't think it's the only way we have to learn, but I think it's a huge vehicle by which we learn life lessons
Mhm.
is failure. I think there's far more to be gained from learning from failure than from learning from successes. Yeah, there's something to be said for, hey, I did a thing and it went well. So that kind of tells me, well, let's keep doing that same thing, right? Because in theory, then that should mean that it'll continue to go well. However, there's times where it's like, well, I did a thing and it didn't work at all, in some cases. And so, what why didn't it work? Where did it go wrong? What did I do wrong? And that's, I think, where some of the most valuable lessons in life, in shooting, in self-defense come from, is from the failures and not from, doing something and always getting it right. And in fact, and that's where one of the problems therein lies is, we can be afraid of failure a lot of times. And so we may have a tendency to try to stay where it's safe, where we kind of already know. I mean, think of it this way: we're trying to learn personal defense and shooting and all these things, and there's a certain body of knowledge you already exist. It's like you're in this dark room, right? And you have a flashlight or whatever, right? And so there's this little bit that you can see that's illuminated, and you're like, this is what I know, and this is where I'm comfortable, and if and these are the things I know how to do, and if I do those things, I do them well. And then venturing outside of that into the dark is uncomfortable because you don't know what's there. You don't know how to do it. Maybe you don't even know how to get there sometimes. And so you're afraid of doing that because you don't know what you don't know. And that also brings with it a risk that you're going to make a mistake and fail. And nobody likes making mistakes. However, if you don't go out into that darkness, you won't discover what's there,
Mhm.
and you will then only stay within this little cone of comfort, so to speak. I
Yep.
like that, a cone of comfort. And so it's we got to be about broadening that cone. So but doing so does bring with it inherent risk of making mistakes along the way. But we learn from those and we go, "Ooh, now I know it's out here. And now this cone of light that surrounds me is now bigger and broader, more defined." And I mean, I think it's absolutely essential. I'm going to piggyback off of where you started the conversation, Brian, as far as talking about failure and like, hey, embrace it, be okay with it, understand it's going to happen. Again, this is the uncensored, meaning we're trying to give you everything that, as we were planning for this. It's like, okay, let's write that down. Let's write that down. We want to try to give you all these lessons, all these things, with respect to training and taking classes. Um, Along with what you said, I think a common mistake or misconception that people make or have is, well, I already know things. Like, because they were in the military once upon a time, they were in law enforcement, or they are in law enforcement, or because they just grew up around guns their whole life and hunted and all these things, and they've certainly fired pistols, on Uncle Bob's farm or whatever, and they're like, yeah, I'm good. I already know what I'm doing. And so the problem there is that you allow this ego to get in your way of venturing into doing more and learning more and doing more things. And I think that's also tied to in many respects to this idea of not wanting to fail. In fact, that's where the students I've had that I see as having the biggest problem with embracing failure, which again is, it's not really embracing failure, it's really embracing learning that comes as a result of that failure. A lot of people that struggle the most with that are, not to single them out as the only people that fit this this mold, but they are definitely one I see a handful of times a year, where I see a cop, somebody that's experienced, been on the job for 8, 10, 12 years. They've certainly been through handgun or pistol training, and here they're taking a pistol shooting course for me. And hey, they bring along with them this sense of self of, this is who I am. I'm an experienced cop. I have life experience. I have street experience. I have cop experience. And, they've already made a big step by showing up in my class to begin with. But then when it's like, hey, I want you to push yourself to this failure point, that's a lot of what my class explores, honestly, are, where are your limits? Because we need to learn what those limits are and then try to push through or beyond them, because then that's where the learning and the growth occurs.
You can't do that if you don't have your ego in check.
Exactly.
I've run into that a ton of times. Not so much from the cop side of things, but the military. Where they're like, "Hey, I was in the military. You can't teach me anything." And I'm like, well, I mean, things have changed a little bit, since when you were in.
Yeah.
I've talked to lots of guys who were, they were in during in the 70s or something like that. And I'm like, well, gunfighting has changed a lot since the 70s.
Hmm.
There's a lot of new things that you should probably pay attention to, and they start to get this ego built up because here they have this identity. I'm a veteran, I'm this tough guy. And I get that personally.
Yep. Yep.
I feel very much like I'm a high level shooter. I'm a combat vet. I've been shooting and hunting my entire life. I shoot competition. I'm a high level shooter, but sometimes I'm in a range and the instructor will come up and adjust something on me. And, at some point I'm like, hey, I don't need adjusting, because I've done this enough. And I have to check my own ego and be like, no,
Yeah.
shut up, you dork. Sit here and listen to this because this is important.
Hmm.
Relearning the fundamentals, even as a high level shooter, is always a productive thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were just having a conversation not even an hour ago about grip on a short, grip pistol.
Hmm.
I'm just curious. So, was there anything that I shared with you that was like, oh, okay, or
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You showed me a new grip style. So you were showing me the new HK with the short
the VP9 SK? Hmm.
VP9 SK. So it's got a short grip on it,
Hmm.
and when it's got a flush mag in it, you can't get your pinky on there. So I was like, hey, how are you handling this whole pinky thing? Because I had known a technique from a long time ago where you cross your pinkies, and you showed me your way, and I like your way better.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I appreciate that about you, and that's something I try to embody as well personally, as an experienced and as an experienced, or as an instructor and as an experienced, say even a competition shooter. Heck, I was just shooting a match last night here locally. Uh, I'm always trying to. It's not easy, because there's definitely a point where you sort of you gain a certain amount of experience where it it's hard to push yourself out, outside of that. But it is an attitude I try to embody, as far as I truly, I mean, it's part of the reason I've gotten to even where I am now, skill wise, is because I've just tried to have this attitude of always seeking more knowledge, more light, more information, more, what's the best way? where possible. And there's certainly things where there's not only one answer, let's say, but it's always about what is the best way to do a certain thing. You know what I mean? And that's not easy, but it is, I think, necessary for growth. And so we're all at different points along the way and along the journey. Many of you watching or listening to this, I mean, you may be what would be described as a beginner, because after all, this is the uncensored beginner's guide to training. Maybe you're more experienced, but either way, it's not that you have to be exactly where we are as we're discussing this, but the idea is to just approach it from a place of, especially when I show up in another instructor's class, and I still believe in and try where possible to take training from other instructors. I would like to think that I will never stop. At least trying to find, at least taking classes from other people, trying to find those opportunities are harder, getting harder and harder for me to find. Partly because my own personal schedule is filling up with teaching classes and attending training conferences and other industry events. But like I was just talking the other day with somebody about attending a class that's not even scheduled for this year. It's actually next year. And I'm thinking, okay, I might be able to make that happen, planning a year out in advance. It's from a highly respected instructor I've never trained with before. But the point is if I'm able to make that happen, I'm going to show up that class and I'm going to go, you know what? Try to put everything else aside that I
Mhm.
already think I know. I'm in this person's class. I deserve, not only for out of respect for them, but also for myself, I deserve to try to simply um, be pliable, in their hands. Like it's like they're the master. I'm there to learn from them. It's like clay. I want to be pliable in their hands, because even if I don't walk away from that class uh, putting into practice all the things that they taught and exactly the way they did it, it's still important to at least expose yourself to that, give it a fair shake, because that's honestly where I've learned some things over the years, where it's like I kind of already thought I knew this,
Mhm.
and then because I was willing to give it a chance, tried somebody else's other way or approach, and then I'm like, oh wow,
Mhm.
and I would never have figured that out had I not been brave and vulnerable, actually, in that
I
regard.
I think I think the most important thing there is you brain flush.
Yeah.
Like, you totally I've been training a lot with a lot of different people. I'm a decent shooter. And sometimes, that instructor will tell me, hey, you need to do this, this, or this. And in my mind, I'll be like, I don't know. That doesn't seem right to me. I don't really like the way that sounds, and that kind of thing. And I'll have this initial reaction of like, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But because I've wiped my brain, I'm here to learn their technique for doing this. I need
Yep.
to experiment. I got to try out that technique and I got to have a totally flushed brain, so I can try this for real and see if I like it and give it a good shake. Don't just try it once and like, nah. Hey, try it a couple of times, try it from a couple of different angles, figure out what he is that he's dealing with. And then you can kind of, decide for yourself whether or not to incorporate
Yeah.
it into your own personal philosophies.
Yep. Very good. As a follow-up to that, I'm going to hit on another point that you listed here in our notes. Um, I think one way that at least helps me to sort of do that, brain flush and like, okay, I'm in a new context, trying to learn new things from somebody I've never worked with before, let's say. How do I achieve that? Well, note taking is super big for me. I try to take very copious notes when I'm in a training course. These days, I used to bring a notepad, but it's just so much easier and less complex for me. Plus, I'm pretty fast at typing on my phone. Uh, so I'll just use my phone for notes in classes a lot of times now. I mean, it's right there. It's in my pocket. It's one less thing I have to carry, as far as I don't have to have a notepad on me now as well. But I do. I want to mention as a tip. I'll speak with the instructor at the start of class or before class and just say, "Hey, I just want to let you know I am here 100% to focus on what you're teaching me. You will probably look at me and think that maybe I'm just like texting or on social media or something on my phone, but I promise you, I'm here 100%, and I'm just taking notes." And I'm using my phone to do that. And they're usually like, yeah, that's cool. No problem. Thanks for
Mhm.
letting me know. I appreciate that. I mean, I see students in some of my classes sometimes that I believe they're taking notes on their phone, but I don't always know for sure, because I just don't know, and then maybe they haven't said, what exactly their intent is with using their phone during a class. I think that is a respectful thing to do, to just kind of like, hey, I take notes on my phone. I'm letting you know that's what I'll be doing. Um, then I'm not as distracted from it as an instructor, thinking, man, have I lost this person as a student? Like, I'm not reaching them in some way. I'm failing, I'm failing as an instructor because whatever I'm teaching is not interesting enough. So they're off playing on their phone or whatever. But anyway, all that to say that to kind of build off of this, opening up your mind and being receptive to new ideas, for me, what helps is making one of my jobs uh, to just take the best notes that I can. So I'm just getting it all down, and I can also further, continue to think on it. What are your
But
thoughts on note taking?
it helps you stay more engaged. I know for myself, I tend to drift off into the ether. I especially if it's death by PowerPoint. I start
Mhm,
sitting down. Maybe it's right after lunch, and I'm starting to like nod off. I'm not going to be paying attention. So
yeah.
I have to have my own techniques for keeping myself engaged, and taking notes is one of those because it encourages me to actually be doing something. I prefer doing it on a pen and paper because then I get to have that physical movement across the page. Kind of helps me, kind of like a
Yeah.
fidget toy in a
Yeah.
way.
I can respect that totally.
Yeah. So I
Mhm,
think, yeah, note taking, I mean, it's important for you to stay engaged so that you're learning the material as it's presented, but also it gives you a reference point for if you need to ask a question. So say, the instructor is talking about something, you can write down in your notes, you can come back to that when there's a moment of pause, or maybe even after the class. Some of the best conversations I have with my students is after the class, when they
mhm,
like, hey, you said a thing, I just need some clarification on that.
mhm,
I love that because they get to come up. I teach them a
mhm,
whole new class, based on that clarification. So I think that helps you to stay engaged. How do you keep yourself awake?
mhm,
That's usually the hardest thing for me. As soon as I sit down, we're in a class room setting. If I'm up on the range and I'm walking around, like there's no big deal. As soon as I sit down, I'm
hmm,
full from lunch. It's
mhm.
nice and warm. The instructor's voice is very soothing, and I'm ready to pass out. So I think little techniques that you might be able to use to kind of keep yourself awake. I know some people will chew gum. That's a way of like kind of keeping yourself awake a little bit. But for myself, I like to stand up
Mm.
and move to the back of the class so I'm not distracting. But then I'll just stand the entire class because otherwise I'll just pass straight out. And that's the only way that I can kind of pay attention. I mean, that comes from the military because, like, if you fall asleep in class, you know, you're dead. So they don't like that so much. So common practice: stand up, you go to the back of the class. If they catch you nodding off, that's a no go. So
Yeah,
I think that's what I use the most to kind of keep myself engaged in the material. If it's not incredibly
yeah,
exciting,
yeah,
that's how I kind of pay attention.
yeah. I mean, obviously, we're not talking about this from the instructor side so much, but it's incumbent upon us as instructors to be good instructors, to be engaging, to be interesting, to keep students involved and engaged in the subject matter and the content that's being taught or learned. Uh, but even then, even when I've been in those situations too. I mean, long days on the range, a hearty meal, whatever it is, and even when it's a class you're excited about, and the instructor's a great teacher, there are still those times where you're just like, oh,
Say that's me every
yeah,
time.
yeah, I
It
get
doesn't
that.
matter what it is. I could be super excited about the class. I could love the instructor. I just get a little warm, sit down, and I just start going to sleep. If I catch somebody doing that in my class, though, I throw a tourniquet at them. So keep them awake.
But I like what you said as far as, yeah, I mean, you can stand up, stay on your feet. Note taking, I agree. That absolutely helps me stay more alert and awake. So 100%. Maybe consume more caffeine if you got to, or whatever it is you got to do, so you can stay engaged. Engagement for you as a learner is important, and the fact is, even when you think you've selected a good instructor, I've been in classes where instructors are fantastic on the range, fantastic, and they absolutely have lots to share and lots to be gained from, uh, but they're just not as engaging, or as I don't know what the right word would be, but I guess that's probably the best one. They're just not as engaging in the classroom type setting, and they may have some material that needs to be covered in a classroom setting, and so it just is what it is. I try to, uh, cut them some slack and extend some grace to them. That, what I mean, because they still have a world and a wealth of knowledge to share with me, and amazing at what they do and they're amazing on the range, and it just is what it is. So do what you got to do to stay awake, but it's important that you do so. To that point, talking about good instructors, that's, I think this is a good segue into that a little bit, as far as how do we choose if we're talking about training and what we wish we knew when we were first just getting started in training and taking classes, how do we choose good instructors?
Hmm. That's a
What are your
good
thoughts on
question.
that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, now I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding of all the instructors that are out there. I think pretty often I'll look at their credentials, like where do they come from? How have they learned these skills and that kind of thing. Although I have taken many classes from people who have no law enforcement or military background, and they are incredibly well put together classes, very
Hmm.
knowledgeable people.
Hmm.
So sometimes I'll get people who are like, I'm never taking a class from somebody who's not, spec ops, something or other, and
Right.
I'm like, that's stupid. There's a lot of information to be gained out there. There's a lot of very smart people who are studying this stuff very closely. That's never a catalyst for me anymore. So I think a lot for me is like everybody's got social media. Go out there,
Yeah.
consume their content,
Yeah.
learn who's saying it about them. What are other people in the industry saying about that person,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. Reading the comments is always good,
Mm.
to a degree. Because you get a lot of knuckleheads in there,
Hmm.
but a lot of times they'll be asking questions, and then you get an opportunity to hear that instructor respond to those questions.
Yeah.
So I think that's might be a way.
Yeah, that's good stuff. For me, and this is something I've thought quite a bit about, and I'm sure I've even mentioned this on the podcast a time or two over the years. I can't tell you exactly when, and I know that Jacob and I are very similarly aligned in this regard. But for me, one of the most important traits in an instructor, I think a mark of a good instructor or a good teacher, is someone that embodies some of the things we've already talked about, such as not getting stuck in their ways, being willing to continue to learn,
Mm.
and not having an ego, right? Being open to new ideas. In other words, an instructor that is continuing to learn themselves.
If you get an instructor with an ego problem, like that's a bad.
Hmm.
Like sometimes people are like, "Oh, he deserves to have that ego." He's here, he's the instructor,
Right,
he's the
sure.
guy on top. Like, no, like if you know some of these legit dudes, these high level instructors, incredibly like no ego on these guys.
Yep.
They are happy to learn anything new. They'll tell you if they think that you're wrong, but if you tell them something they haven't heard before, they love it.
Yeah, I agree. And so the reason I think it's a mark of a good instructor is because I think, I mean, actually probably a better way of explaining it is the instructors that I have seen or witnessed that were not my favorite were those where it was quite apparent that they at some point had determined in their own journey that, oh, I know enough, I'm good enough, I'm experienced enough, and they just stop learning. They stop growing,
Oh, interesting.
right? And so then what happens is, well, their curriculum begins to go stale,
Hmm.
dated. That's when you come across an instructor that's still teaching stuff that, well, maybe was relevant 20, 30, 40 years ago, but in today's world we know is, either has been disproven or there's just simply been better ways that, have been discovered or shown. Um, those are instructors that tend to um, not respond as well to student questions, especially questions that are kind of out in left field. You know
Because
what I
they
mean?
won't know the answer.
Yeah,
And they'll, because of their ego, they don't want to look stupid in front of their
right,
class. And they
right.
have this identity of being a high level instructor. And so, yeah,
Yep,
it's just a snowball.
yep. They're also that they tend to be instructors that tend to make the class more about them
Hmm.
rather than what's being taught and trying to get that transferred over to the student.
Hmm.
And so, th- in other words, what I just described is a lot of what I don't like to see in an instructor. And so, what I have found is a defining factor in an instructor that avoids those tendencies are those that continue to learn and grow themselves. That just they continue to seek uh, what's the word? Excellence. They pursue excellence,
Hmm.
excellence in what they know, excellence in what they do, excellence in what they teach. Someone that continues to learn is also continuing to learn how to improve their teaching.
Seems like to me when I meet these guys that are on just like I would consider myself to be a combat expert, but I have met combat masters.
Oh yeah,
And there's a
right.
huge difference between an expert and a master. Like compared to like the common citizen, like I'm way above that common citizen, but the master level combat guys that I've met are just at a totally different level. And the reason why they are so without ego is because they're so driven to learn everything they possibly can that them having an ego would get in the way of them getting better. So
Yes.
they are so dedicated to their craft. They don't care. They don't have an ego. They're like, teach me everything that you
Hmm.
know. I
Yep.
will learn everything possible because I want to get better.
Yep. Ego-driven people tend to be uh, more interested in proving things, like proving who they are and
Mm,
proving what they know.
this is true.
Non-egotistical people or non-ego driven people tend to be very comfortable in who they are and in their skin, and not afraid of failure, not afraid of learning. And those are the people I love associating with. I mean,
Mhm.
like you, I've met some combat masters, and with few exceptions, they are really, really legit, cool people that are incredible. That like the number one thing that, like, a word that pops into my head right now thinking about this is confidence,
Mhm.
because they know who they are and what they're about, and it's not because of ego. It's because they understand. Um, they understand what they know really well, and they also, and what that tells them is it helps them understand that there's a lot they still don't know. And that's it's an interesting little balance, because it's really easy to swing, like to go from confidence in knowing who you are and what you know, and also a little bit about what you don't know. It's really easy to go from confidence and go into overconfidence, egotistical, into what's another good word that I'm looking for. Um, it just where, like, you can't be wrong. It's just there's a word that's not quite coming to my tongue, but like there's a difference between confidence and just like flat out being a jerk
Mhm.
in some cases too.
Yeah, arrogance.
Arrogant. There you go.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for. Is arrogant. Yeah, from confidence to arrogance.
Mhm.
Yep, you nailed it.
Yeah, I think once you have people who have that, the ego aspect is so hard because I mean, I I had to grow up at some point. I feel like I've got a reasonable handle on my ego now, but for a long time, especially as a younger dude, I had to prove to everybody around me, like, hey, I'm a tough guy. I had to prove it to myself. And if somebody told me, hey, you're not a tough guy, I'd be like, hey, I got to prove to you I'm a tough guy. But now I've proven enough times to myself
Yeah.
that I'm tough enough. Now, if somebody says that to me, I just smile. Whereas before, that might have been a fight because I gotta prove this to you, right? Like, why do you gotta prove that? I've proven that enough times to myself. And I
Yep.
think that's when you get those high level instructors, the ones who are insecure, they haven't proven it to themselves and they feel like they've got to prove it over and over and over again to everybody around them, or else they don't have that identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. I got some more thoughts that I think I want to come back to here in a bit, with regard to we were just spending some time talking about choosing a good instructor. Um, I want to pivot to that again a little bit later, talking about choosing the right classes for you, for where you are, what you're trying to learn and achieve. So we'll kind of put a pin in that part of the discussion. Um, but there's a couple of things that I want to throw out there really quick, and I think you've got a couple of things that you can throw out really quick that are just like really good little tidbits of kind of best practices, or tips on what to do or what not to do. And the first thing I was going to say with respect to um, going to classes, taking classes, uh, I talked earlier about taking notes, and I also talked about letting instructor know, like, hey, if I'm on my phone taking notes, I like to give them a heads up. That's what I'm doing, out of a show of respect. The other thing is, it is a good idea to ask an instructor if it's okay to take photos and or videos during their class. Um, they have the right. I feel, uh, even if you're in a public space or whatever, like whatever, regardless of what the law says, from just a respect standpoint, and I think even an ethical one to an extent, it's a good idea to say, hey, as it, what's your rules, or what's your expectation as far as us as students or attendees of your class with respect to taking photos or videos of the class and or its content.
Mm.
Some instructors don't necessarily want to see their stuff put out there all over social media, and some of the and not necessarily because they're hiding anything. Although I do think that exists as well. I think there are some instructors that say no videos in my class because they sort of subconsciously know that some of what they're teaching may not be totally correct, or that there's some BS mixed in there somewhere, and
Mm.
they don't want to get called out on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for a lot of like your quality instructors where I do know there's a few of these that would be in this category where they're an excellent instructor. I respect the heck out of them, but maybe they don't want things filmed and for public consumption in particular, because context may be missing. And that sometimes actually it happens quite often, where you'll see little clips that somebody posts out on social media, and when it's not taken or viewed in the full context of how it's presented in class, it can be misinterpreted by those that end up viewing it, that have no sense or understanding for where it's coming from or where the instructor's coming from. And so I totally get and understand and respect that. I've personally had the policy as an instructor to I'm just like, guys, whatever pictures, videos, whatever you take, especially for personal use, like just for them to use, I definitely am like, yeah, that is not a problem. You take all the videos, all the photos you want in my classes with me. If it's for personal use, don't care. No problem whatsoever. I do then add the caveat, if you're going to put things out there publicly, I not that I'm saying you have to, but I appreciate when you let me know that you're going to do that, or when you're going to post something up. If anything, for me to have the opportunity to review and make sure there's not going to be something that's missed
Mm-hmm.
contextually. It's not about I'm not trying to like, some guys get the attitude of trying to protect their curriculum because, well, hey, why would people come and train with me if my curriculum just gets proliferated out, throughout the world via social media or through YouTube or whatever? I don't view it like that at all. In fact, I have only wanted to take classes more from certain instructors because they were free with the content they put out on social media and on YouTube, because then that allowed me to get introduced to them. And it was part of that evaluation of, how am I choosing a good instructor here? I want to know what they're about.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know how they teach. I want to know, the personality they have. I want to try to, de- determine for myself, is this an instructor, as we established earlier in this episode, that I feel is continually trying to improve themselves? I can get a sense for that with how they present things and how they talk and how they teach. And the fact that I came across a video from Scott Jelinski, let's say, who's been quite free with what is posted out there from his classes. It's like, oh, wow, I like that. I want to train with that guy now. Versus the other attitude, like I said, where some instructors don't want videos or photos of their classes being out there in the public because they're afraid that it's going to get stolen by other instructors, or that students will go, oh, I saw that. I don't need to go train with that guy.
Yeah.
Guess what? Those students that feel that way, and this, we're talking about what you should know as a student just getting into taking classes, things like that. So there's a little bit of a subtle hint here. Those students that have that attitude of, oh, I saw that guy's stuff online already, so I already, I don't need to go train with him now. Those are not the students that you want anyway.
Yeah.
Promise you.
Now, when you're talking about like instructors protecting their curriculum, I've had some students come up and ask me if I can send them the PowerPoint.
Mhm.
And I don't mind that at all. I mean, like if
Yeah.
it saves somebody's life because they want to learn more or share it with somebody else, then I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't teach currently. Well, I mean, every once in a while I do a concealed carry class here locally. That does have PowerPoint slides. I'm not opposed to sharing that with students. Um, but my pistol intelligence course, was what I teach the most of these days, that I actually have 0 slides in that whole class, quite intentionally for a variety of reasons that I won't go into necessarily, because not necessary. But I think that that's another good tip for beginners just getting into taking classes and training. Feel free to ask the instructor, hey, you shared some slides in class. Would it be all right if I got a copy of those? I think it's a noble thing. I think it's a good thing when instructors will share resources like that. to students, especially for them to refer to after the class, because I think it helps reinforce the learning process for them to review some of those things. Because it might be 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road, they're like, oh yeah, that power, oh, and they start reviewing that PowerPoint from that class, and then, oh yeah, that's right, and then they're remembering things that they learned that maybe they forgot about, or maybe during the last 3, 6, 12 months of them putting into practice what they learned in your class, maybe now they've got a little bit of a different perspective, and now they review your PowerPoint and they go, ooh, and they have other realizations they might not have otherwise had before, because now they're in a different, kind of, they're in a different place,
Hmm.
mentally and with respect to their knowledge. So what do I think? If the instructor does not want to share their PowerPoints, you should respect that. And that's totally okay. It's their prerogative. But I definitely think you guys should ask for that. And because if they're like, yeah, sure, no problem. Like that's your approach. Great, awesome. That's a good resource for you to have as a student. And if this instructor's like, sorry, I don't really share them. Okay, cool. Thanks, man.
Hmm.
That's what I think about that. So I'm going to throw it at you. This is something you listed in our notes. A couple of, I think you can hit on these real quick for us. Join a club, make it social, and have a goal and a budget for training and gear. So why don't you touch on those couple of tips there?
Well, so make it social. You're not going to do anything if your boys aren't there. I mean, that's kind of, you want to go out and hang out with the guys and have a good time, and be with like-minded people. I think, finding yourself a club and some people to hang out with when you go and do that stuff will encourage you to stay on top of your game. If you're going to a class with a friend, then it's just going to be a lot more fun. And you'll have somebody there to kind of support you, especially if you forget a spare magazine or something like that. A lot of times you got
Yeah.
somebody that can kind of hook you up and take care of you. You got a travel buddy that you can get to this stuff with. So making it social is something that kind of helps you to stay motivated to train, because pretty often people will start this, and they'll get really into it, and then at some point they plateau, and then they
Yeah.
stop attending. And a good reason to keep yourself motivated and engaged is be a part of a club. And then what was the next one?
I'll respond to that real quick,
Yeah.
and then I'll remind you the other thing. Some of my best friends now that I consider to be like my really truly good friends have been those that I've met in this community, in this industry, if you will. And by community, I mean like this community of like-minded folks that are getting out there and taking classes. I reconnected with. I mean, I see him every once in a while, but we definitely communicate via text and messages, all the social media all the time. But was able to reconnect with a friend last week at SHOT Show. Just bumped into him. I'm like, hey, Paul. Hey, man, so good to see you. First time I met Paul was in a Modern Samurai Project class in Iowa.
Hmm.
Taught by Scott Jedlinski. And I freaking love and adore Paul. He's a great guy, great dude, great shooter. We connected in that class. We've stayed in contact, and I mean, I think of him as a dear friend. It's really good to, he's in Iowa. I'm here in Colorado. I mean, it's not like super, super far away, but it's not like I get to see him all that often. So some of the best people I've met and people I consider to be my friends have been people I've met in training classes. I could add to that also even, going to shooting competitions and stuff too. But in the context of training, building that community, both just from a personal standpoint, has a lot of benefits because you just get to have really cool friends.
Hmm.
But number two, it's also really beneficial to the overall training community. There are, as I travel the country a little bit and teach classes all over the place, I've observed that there's certain pockets of the country that have really cool and unique training communities. And a lot of times those are developed organically. I would say most of the time they are absolutely developed organically, where people just start connecting, getting together, hosting instructors, taking classes, making each other better, and then those relationships continue, and it's a snowball effect,
Hmm.
and just gets bigger and better and more awesome, and brings more people in. Like, all those are huge, huge, huge benefits. Yes, for everybody involved individually and on a personal level, but for the community, we're just so much better for it. And so, I, as a tip to you, beginners, if you will. Again, I realize everybody listening or watching, this is not necessarily intended to be only for beginners, but this is the uncensored beginner's guide to training. Uh, you can, like, the, there's a world without, like, there's endless possibilities. I think is what I'm trying to say with respect to, like, what you put into it, you'll get out of it. And as we foster and create a community in training, like whatever that means to you, whatever that looks like, just forging those friendships and those connections will have great implications on a personal level as well as on the community level.
Yeah, I think the thing I enjoy the most about being in the firearms industry, or at least this job, um, is getting to meet like just some absolute studs.
Yeah.
Just top quality men. Like these are dudes who are, great fathers, great husbands, great friends, and absolutely lethal, just walking and oozing lethality and just a kind protector to their whole community, and I really admire men like that. And I would like to surround myself with those types of men.
100%.
But those types of men kind of congregate in these types of communities. So if you want to be that,
Yep.
go find those people, put them around you, and become it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're one of those dudes in my
Thank you,
community.
Riley. I also view you as one of those dudes in my life.
Within my circle of trust.
That's it.
Yeah, dude, solid. So the other thing was having goals and or a budget for training and gear.
Yeah. I think, it's important to have realistic goals for yourself. I tend to attack everything in my life with very unrealistic goals. When I first started, my firearms training, I want to be John Wick. I wanted to do all the cool stuff. And a lot of times you gotta, walk before you run. A lot of times you gotta crawl before anything else. And this is where, keeping your ego in check is important, like
Yeah.
recognizing where you are at in your skill levels. Pretty often I'll get people who I'm like, hey, you need to take this fundamentals class. And they're like, nah, dude, I already took one of those. I'm like, well, I think you could really benefit from another one. Like, nah, I took it. I'm good. I don't need that anymore. Like,
Right.
I take fundamentals class every chance I get. I know all the material. I can repeat it verbatim back to the instructor. But one of the good things about having a new instructor that you haven't taken a class from is you pick up a new tidbit. I'm always picking up small critiques and tweaks to my shooting just because I'm taking a new fundamentals class from a new instructor.
Yep.
So having goals and recognizing where you're at and giving yourself, hey, it's okay to slow down and not go so fast. Pretty often I see that so much in new shooters. They want to go really, really fast. They see Riley shoot this drill and they're like, they try to do it and everything goes to hell. Right. But that's just how it tends to be.
Yep.
But if you can, compensate for that ahead of time, then you don't have to deal with it. And then if you have a goal for your gear, and a budget, then you can kind of prioritize the proper equipment for you to make the most out of your training. How often do you see people show up at the range with, a bad holster and that kind of thing? And you ask them like, it's better to get a good holster. And you're like, well, I couldn't afford it. This is what I got for right now. And sometimes you just got to make do. You still got training to do as long as you're doing it safely. That's the most important part. So if you have an unsafe holster, then that's a no-go. But if you just have a less expensive holster, hey, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Solid thoughts there. I agree with all that. I mean, definitely as long as things are safe, your equipment is safe, your gear is safe and acceptable for use, like whatever, run what you brung, so to speak. But there's also benefits to be realized from upgrading gear and making some improvements, especially over time. I mean, that's how I did it. Started in one place, and I had certainly, as I view it now, less ideal gear. Years ago than I do now. But so it's good to have a budget. Here's what I would say in to kind of touch or build on what you added. Number one, I would decide whatever goals are that you have. I would say it's a good goal to at least take one quality, at least one full day. But honestly, I'd say like if you can take the equivalent of 2 days of on the range live fire training, especially on the shooting perspective per year, that's a good minimum goal to start from. I think a single 1 day class a year is like meh. Not that you have to take a single 2 day class. Maybe it's two classes that are each 1 day, at a time, spread out, maybe a couple, few weeks or a couple months apart or whatever. But either way, you should have a goal, and you should at least be taking one really solid quality class per year, I feel, if you're serious about this sort of thing. And it should be manageable. You're talking like maybe 1 weekend a year. If that's all you're doing, 1 weekend a year, might cost you a few $100. I think those are all very, very small prices to pay to get a lot of value out of it. But maybe you decide that, hey, I want to take 2 classes a year, 3 classes a year, 4 classes a year, once per quarter, whatever. Just decide what the goal is for you and what you're able to achieve. Make it realistic. Make it reflect, where you are in life currently. You got to have balance in life, of course, and then make sure your budget, your training budget, your ammunition budget, also is in line with those goals too. The other thing I would add to that is I would not be afraid to spend good money for a good course. And I frankly believe you get what you pay for. There are some really amazing instructors out there that teach great classes that really don't cost that much. And I think, frankly, those instructors a lot of times are undervaluing their own services, but that's up to them to decide. But where I feel like today, a good quality, like a really good quality class is priced at a lot of times is $400 plus,
Hmm.
$400 plus. And I know that some people are like, oh man, like, whew, $400, where's that going to come from? Well, you know what? If all you can manage is one class a year and it costs you $400 or $500, you got a year to save up for it. And you can do that if you put your mind to it. It's not that much, out of every paycheck or per month. I mean, per month, it's like less than $50 a month. I think you can do it if it's important enough to you. But my other point to this is don't be afraid to spend several $100s paying a quality instructor, because in my experience, I have always gotten way more value in return. I've always felt like I got my money's worth.
Hmm.
And so sometimes it feels like you're spending a lot of money. And keep in mind, I have traveled multiple times to classes where I was spending $500-$600. In fact, there was one, I think the most expensive class I've paid was about $1,000 out of pocket. And I had to travel to it. So I had travel costs of getting there. I actually drove for that one. I didn't fly. It would, either way, it would have been several $100s in flights or gas money, hotel expenditure, food along the way, all that stuff, right? So you're talking by the ammo, of course, for that class was actually a pretty high round count class. I think it was like 1,800 rounds over 3 days.
Hmm.
So, in today's prices, you're talking like $1,000 class, let's say $1,000 just travel, hotel, maybe even more than that, depending on where it is and the kind of hotel you like to stay in. And then maybe, another like $500-$600 in ammo is like $2,500
Hmm.
to take a 2 or 3 day class. Guess what? I still feel like I got all my money's worth out of that 100%.
Yeah. But where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, if this is something you're dedicated to, you're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that you can, I mean, a lot of this is we're trying to give you, some tips for maximizing the return on that investment.
Yep.
If you're going to put out $2,500, you want to make sure you're getting as much out of that class as possible. You're staying engaged and you're learning as much as you can. And one of the other benefits is not just the information that you're going to be gaining, but it's also the ability to do it live. Like there's
Yep.
not a whole lot of places that you can go where you can move, draw, and shoot, all at the same time. Very often you go to the range and they only want, static
Yep.
1 round at a time every second, and that kind of thing. So you're also paying for the facility to be able to run and move and shoot and have an
Yep.
instructor critique you live on how to do all that. So,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not saying you have to spend, a ton of money to get quality training. Just that I know that for me, if 10, 15 years ago, if you'd said, hey, here's this great class taught by a phenomenal instructor and it's going to cost you $400 for 2 days, I would have been like, whoa. I'm trying to set the expectation for, our more entry level folks right here, right now, that it may seem like a lot, but it's worth it. But at the same time, if you do your research, you could probably find a quality instructor in your local area. Maybe it costs $200 for a 2 day class. Again, I think they're probably still undervaluing themselves. However, you can find great classes for less money. Just don't be afraid to spend where it's important enough to you, and the class and the instructor is a good fit and a good match for what you're trying to learn and where you're trying to get to as far as your next accomplishing your next goals.
Yeah.
So to that point, actually, I've got one other thing I'm going to add real quick, and then we'll go to that next point, which is this was a tip I added here, which is please make sure that you read the course descriptions fully. It's asking a lot, I know, but I can't tell you how many times as an instructor I've had students that show up to class and they're missing something that they should have brought. Uh, their expectations are mismanaged. I explain with regards to my physical intelligence course that it's not a beginner level class. Like, it should not be the first class you've ever taken. It shouldn't. And yet I've got some people that have showed up, not a lot, but a couple of them that it's pretty apparent that they weren't quite ready for, my class. Now, I still did everything I could to work with them. And I do believe I, absolutely helped them grow, because my goal is whoever shows up at my doorstep as, as my students in my classes, regardless of who they are, where they are at, as long as they have a good attitude, they're willing to learn, and they're safe, I'm going to make sure they leave my class having accomplished, those goals of improving themselves. But please read class descriptions fully, okay? And bring everything they tell you to. And if there's something you don't have, you better go buy it. Or you better be communicating with that instructor and saying, "Hey, I saw you listed this, but I have this other thing. Is that also going to work, or do I need something else?" Like, just make sure you have all the necessary gear that the instructor tells you you're going to need, that you're prepared in the way that you need to be prepared. I've had students show up to classes where in the class description, because we are 35 minutes from the nearest place you can find decent food, and I say in my class description, "Hey, be prepared to bring a lunch with you for both days that you can eat at the range." And then what happens on day one? They show up, they're like, "Oh, I need to run into town to get something to eat," and town's 30 plus minutes away.
Yeah.
When you only have an hour, lunch to work with, that doesn't work really well. So, uh, so make sure you read descriptions. Make sure you're abiding by what the instructor tells you that class is either all about, and or the required gear for that class. Along with that, it's always a good idea to have backups. By that I mean, if you have a gun in class, and if you have and can afford a backup gun, not necessarily like a backup in that you're carrying like a pocket gun or a backup gun, just a gun that you can fall back to if the gun you were primarily using in class goes down. I mean, certainly we try to get that gun up and running again if we can, but it's really convenient when you're like, "Hey, that gun's not working. You got a backup?" "Yep, no problem. Grab the backup. We're back up and running. No big deal." Because if you have problems with guns, problems with other gear, problems with ammunition, well, that's another point. Buy decent quality ammunition. It doesn't have to be the best quality. It just needs to be good quality that's going to work reliably in your gun. Because a couple of things that will absolutely be detrimental to your learning on the range is a gun that's not functioning, that's not functioning, crappy gear that's not functioning.
Mm-hmm.
So, or gear that you forgot at home.
Extremely frustrating. That has happened to me many times.
Yeah.
And it's so upsetting to watch everybody else play while you get to sit there and watch.
Yep.
Not fun at all.
And if you want bonus points, even as a student, where possible, it's not always possible, because like if I'm flying to go take a class somewhere, I might be restricted as far as what I can take with me.
Mm-hmm.
But I often try to have extra ammo and extra guns and extra mags and even extra holsters that I often travel with, even as a student. I do that as an instructor where I can, but I've even done that as a student because I've had fellow class members in the class, fellow students, where they had a problem with a gun. It's like, "Hey, cool. Guess what? I've got a spare, one in the gun in the range bag there."
Mm-hmm.
We get them set up. They're back up and running. No big deal. That's bonus points if you want to be a really awesome friend to your fellow students. All right, the thing I said we were going to put a pin in, and we need to come back to and probably end at this. I think that we talked about finding a good instructor, but I think it's important that we choose and select good courses that are a good fit for us, whoever us is, wherever you are. Like, it's important, I think, to choose good classes that are a good fit for you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, classes that are a good fit for you. I think part of that, reading that good description and making sure that you can deal with it. One of the most important things that I've seen, I mean, imagine we'll get to this in the range portion of whenever we do this next in the series, but making sure that you're physically fit enough to
that's fair.
handle, the stringent issues. I know pretty often we'll have somebody that comes into the class and maybe they're just getting over a serious illness, or maybe they're not used to moving very often, and they get out there and they start to try to do some of these shooting techniques and drills, and they are just wiped. So making sure that you're picking a class that isn't outside of your physical fitness level
Yeah.
is important as well. But if you feel like, hey, there's a class that I want to do, but I don't feel like I'm physically fit enough, hey, here's your motivation. Get out there and start, I'm putting in some work here so that you can get to those classes. Because, I mean, what are we doing here? We're learning how to
Yep.
fight. This
Yep.
is combat, and you need to have as fit a body as you can possibly have. You might not have a Navy SEAL fitness body, but you can be as fit as you can be,
Yep.
so that whenever something crazy pops off, you can handle it as good as you can. So thinking about these classes and why we're learning these skills and teaching ourselves, those techniques for getting ourselves better for, fitness is going to be pretty
Yep.
important.
That's a really great tip. I'm reminded of the class I took with Dave Spalding
Mhm.
of handgun combatives a few years back. It was called Kinetic Pistol,
Mm.
and it was a class. I mean, almost the whole class was done with movement involved. Sometimes moving and then shooting, shooting then moving and while shooting. I mean, it's like the whole class is all about basically movement incorporated into shooting, and it was physically. I mean, there were times where you're just running back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. At a full sprint, even. Uh, yeah, that would definitely be a class that would be very difficult for someone that had some physical limitations. So really solid point. And again, a lot of times these sorts of things are going to be in the class description as far as
Mhm.
what it's about, what you're doing, what you're expected to do, maybe special physical requirements that may be necessary. So that's why you got to read the description of the class. To that, I'll add that I think for you to choose the right classes for you to get the most benefit out of, you need to have an honest conversation with yourself about what your goals are. Okay. What are you looking to achieve? I know I've met students in classes, fellow students, or had students that took classes from me where it's very apparent that it was basically for fun. And that's okay too. If that's the goal is to have fun, shoot guns, that's fine. Like
Totally
it's
fine.
America,
Yeah,
right? Like cool.
totally fine to do that.
It's great to have fun and shoot guns. But also, so if that's it, fine, whatever. But maybe your goal is to become a better protector and defender, you know. Well then why are you taking, I don't know. I mean actually there could be maybe a case to be made for some competition type classes, but you might, the point is like, what are your goals? What are you looking to achieve? And then choose classes that align with those goals,
Mhm.
right? I sometimes get branded as a competition shooter and a competition teacher, which I understand why, because that is where a huge part of my personal focus is. And a lot of the biggest lessons I've learned about how to shoot really well and efficiently has come because of growth discovered on the competition shooting range.
Mhm.
However, like what I tell people is what I teach. I teach it's a shooting course. It's all about how to get better shooting, period. And so whether you're a competitive person or a defensive oriented person, it shouldn't matter. Like both stand to gain or to get benefit from what I teach in a pure shooting course. But yet I have some people that have told me that they were hesitant about signing up for my course because they're like, well, it seemed like this is more of a competition thing. I'm like, no, like you're thinking defensive. And that's why if you read the course description, it doesn't say anything at all about this is a competition shooting class or a competition oriented class. Like this is about getting better as a shooter,
Mhm.
period. And so I'm just using it as an example of that's where sometimes we miss the mark with not aligning, certain classes with our goals. We need to know what those are. We need to understand what the class is. We need to read the description. We need to know what our goals are. I know I've had people show up at class and they don't even know what their personal goals are. And I begin each class by basically, hey, let's get to know each other. What's your name? Tell us a little bit about your background. Why are you here? And I know I can identify the ones that don't exactly know why they're here. And it's usually a response that kind of goes like this: whoa, I just want to get uh, faster and more accurate at shooting. Okay, I mean, that's not a bad goal. I mean, we all want to get faster and more accurate, right?
Mhm.
However, that's a lazy catch-all, uh, answer of, oh, I just want to get better and faster at shooting. Yeah, okay. I think you might want to dig a little bit deeper on that and find out really what are your goals? What are you looking to accomplish? and then choose classes that align with that. Super, super important. Okay. I think it's also important, like for instance, if you're truly serious about becoming the best prepared defender that you can be, then you need to be honest with yourself and recognize that only taking certain types of classes is a bit limiting.
This is true.
And wanting to broaden out and get into, you need to make sure you understand the law. So take some legal training. Okay. You need to probably understand other avenues of defense, less lethal, medical. I was going to get there. Medical, combatives. Okay. Like if you're serious about defensive work, well, then these are all things that are a part of defensive, but again, you're only taking a shooting class all the time. Okay, that's not bad. It's just that you're also missing all these other opportunities that make you a better defender. That's why you need to be honest with yourself, your goals, and then creating a plan of, okay, I'm going to train with this class with this person and this class with this person, so you're getting all those things that are important to you to accomplish your goal.
I think that's important, like when you're trying to pick your class, we'll probably talk about that in a little bit, but don't just pick things that you're good at.
Yes.
Pick all the things that you're bad at.
Yeah.
Like if you are a banging, pistol shooter, maybe you need to take some combatives, maybe a medical class, shore up those areas. Combat is an incredibly dynamic and complicated topic. There's a lot of different things that you need to know.
Yeah.
And you can't just stay in one category or else, you're not hitting it all.
There you go. I think it's a good place to kind of wrap it up. And to that point, guess what? Where is one place where you can get training in all these sorts of things that we just discussed?
A Guardian Conference?
Yeah. There's this thing called a Guardian Conference in Oklahoma City, September 20th to the 22nd of 2024. Oklahoma City Gun Club, a fabulous, beautiful, amazing range that's
gorgeous.
That hosts us for this.
I got a class there. You got a class there?
Yeah. I mean, imagine that. I'm teaching shooting stuff. You're teaching medical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We got dudes teaching shotgun stuff now, as we mentioned. AR-15 carbine work, legal, combatives, force on force. I know OC spray and other less lethal options. Tons of great classes, all in one place, 3 days, very reasonably and affordably priced. I know, because yes, you're going to be like, oh, well, that's still a lot of money. However, to do all those same things, you'd spend a lot more. And this is in one location for 3 days with an amazing community of people. So we hope to see you at the 2024 Guardian Conference, guardianconference.com. And again, if you're just looking to get into a class, and you can search on the website at class.concealedcarry.com. You can choose by your area. You can find classes that are located close to you, concealed carry class, other defensive pistol type class, pistol intelligence class with me, whatever it is. Go to class.concealedcarry.com and sign up for training there. Thank you for being a part of this episode with us here today. Hope you got something out of it, some takeaways. Hopefully feeling a little bit better prepared, especially on the mindset, side of things, and just kind of knowing the things to look for and how to make sure you're choosing the best instructors and the best classes that help you get to where you want to be as a shooter and as a self-defender. Yeah. Anything else, Brian?
No, I think that's all gold. I love it. Let us know how you feel about it.
Sounds good. So guys, until next time, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.